everyone. Welcome back to The Victim's Voice. I'm your host, Lorelei. Today, we're going to continue with part 3 in the case of Crystal McCrory Jones. Since we don't do small talk, let's go ahead and jump right in. In episode 2, we covered the February 23rd meeting with Sheriff Matthews, the autopsy report that had multiple discrepancies, Tony accusing Jana of fraud with the GoFundMe money and therefore withholding Crystal's ashes from everyone. We ended the episode with Jana reaching back out to Sheriff Matthews after receiving the death certificate that had a specific time of death on it, 11 a.m., which according to the timeline taken from Crystal's computer, Tony would have been driving by the house right about that time. So Jana wanted to know if the sheriff had any new information, and he said that he did. Sheriff Matthews informed Jana that he had this new information for a while, but had been waiting on her to come in. Once again, does he not know how to pick up a phone? Why does she have to drive there? He didn't say at the end of the meeting on the 23rd, anytime you have any questions, drive to the sheriff's department to talk to me. No, he said, call me immediately. No one else but me. So according to Matthews, the most important issues that they had talked about at the meeting on the 23rd were the storage unit and the rental car and the Hawaii thing, as he called it. What about the timeline showing everywhere Tony had gone on the day of Crystal's death? The timeline that, if the time of death is correct, Tony would have been driving by his house at that time. The timeline that proves he lied. Why is that not one of the most important issues? Sheriff Matthews started off talking about the storage unit, stating that Tony and Crystal had purchased it a few months before her death and that she was storing some of her things in it. He says, don't quote me on this because it's been however long it's been since you've been in my office. He tells her that the receipt says that there are 46 payments left, not 48 like Jana had stated. However, why wouldn't Matthews have this receipt with him to show Jana and prove her wrong? Then he talked about the quote-unquote Hawaii thing and the rental car. He simply says that he believes it was a spam email. He has no proof of this. It's just what he believes. He said that he and Chief Irby got to talking and opened up some of their own email addresses that they no longer used, and they had emails that were similar. Not the same, but similar. So he decided because of that, there was no Hawaii trip. That's what he said. There is no Hawaii trip. Plain and simple. Then he had the audacity to ask Jana to refresh his memory on the other things that she had brought him, because it had been a couple of months since their meeting, which means he obviously didn't even look at the documents at all. He probably shoved them in a drawer somewhere as soon as the meeting was over. Jana told Matthews that one of the other things was Tony's involvement with underage girls. She also brought up the CPS reports and the fact that the sheriff was supposed to contact Tony's ex-wife about the CPS charges. Sheriff Matthews blatantly said those CPS charges never existed. And not only that, but there was no protective order on anyone under CPS, and that there never had been one. He said that he was at his home in his kitchen, but that when he got to the office the next morning, he would refresh himself on the issue. But he knew that Alan Irby, who can't be trusted in my opinion, had talked to a CPS representative and said there was no protective order in place. But there was absolutely one in place. I have a copy of it that Jana sent me, and we talked about it in episode 1. Jana then told Matthews that her issue was the fact that Tony had been found guilty by CPS about the underage girls, and it just never went any further because the DA in that particular parish had decided not to file charges. But Matthews was sticking to his story, flat out denying this. Jana continued and brought up the timeline, where Tony was when Crystal died, the most important information that she had provided with Sheriff Matthews, even though she had to be the one to bring it up. Sheriff Matthews made sure to remind Jana again that he didn't have the documents in front of him, so he was going off of his memory. He said that he did remember that Tony had done some work at Forest School that day. Jana reminded Matthews that Tony first had gone to Bastrop to do work for Daryl Billings, and then had drove by his and Crystal's house, and then drove straight to the sheriff's department, which he had labeled in his phone as work. Sheriff Matthews stated that he couldn't say whether that was true or not, but if it was, he had no idea why Tony would have come to his office. It absolutely is true because there is documentation proving it. His phone places him there. Sheriff Matthews then started to make excuses as to why Tony's phone might have been pinging at certain locations. Jana said yes, but Tony had told him that he had been at Forest High School all day, which was not true. He had driven back to Oak Grove from Bastrop, and after getting the death certificate and seeing the time of death was 11 a.m., it lined up with when he would have been driving past the house. And this is when Sheriff Matthews stopped Jana and went off of the deep end. He stated, quote, "There is no time of death. And if you're looking at a death certificate that's got a time of death on it, there is absolutely no way that anybody could put an exact time of death. I don't care who they are, and I don't mind telling you that." What is he even talking about? Crystal was in a controlled environment. She wasn't out in the elements, so yes, there are ways to get, at the very least, an estimated time of death. No, it's not going to be to the exact minute, but they could definitely give a roundabout time. It's called a forensic investigation. They use body temperature, which in this case, Crystal's temperature was never taken. It was listed as simply cold. They also use rigor mortis, the stiffening of the body. This occurs in 3 12-hour increments. The first 12 hours is the onset period. Rigor mortis starts in your appendages and works its way to the trunk of your body. The second 12-hour period, the body is in full rigor. And in the last 12-hour period, the body comes out of rigor, starting on the appendages and working its way to the trunk of the body again. They use the pooling of blood, which is also called liver mortis. They use the stage of decomposition, insect activity, which doesn't apply in this case, stomach contents, potassium levels in the vitreous humor of the eye, along with the last time she was seen or spoken to and her last phone activity. So what does Matthews mean that there is no way to determine a time of death? They determine times of death all the time. That is one way that they are able to convict murderers when it's a mostly circumstantial case. Also, an official time is almost always recorded on the death certificate for legal purposes, even if it is an estimation. Sheriff Matthews then asked Jana what time was on the certificate, and she once again told him 11 a.m. He then asked her who put that on there, and she told him that she had just ordered it from the state and it was on there. So he asked her who signed off on it, and she told him that it was the coroner of West Carroll Parish. He then had the nerve to low-key act like Jana had forged this document, or at least something to that extent. He said that it was absolutely false and that there is no way any human being on the earth could say that she died at 11 o'clock. He then says that he hates speaking to her in that tone, as he continues to speak to her in that tone, and says again that there is no way anyone could put 11 a.m. on the death certificate. Jana, who at this point is speechless because of the way he's acting, tried to tell him that she was just telling him what was mailed to her, and that she could send him a picture if he wanted. However, he declines, saying he doesn't need all that. He told her that saying Crystal died at 11 and then comparing it to a phone ping is ludicrous. No, it's not ludicrous. It's called a proper investigation. He then told Jana that she was digging and that he was sorry he had to use that tone with her, but she had put all of this in his lap, so he had to. Matthews then had the nerve to tell Jana that the things she had brought to him to look at were irrelevant. Excuse me? He is the one that picked the two least relevant things to talk about, ignoring the more damning information. How is a timeline showing that Tony not only lied about where he was throughout the day, but that he had also driven by the house late that morning around the time that it's believed she died? How is this irrelevant? Then he brought up the emails about the car in Hawaii and the storage shed again and said they were also irrelevant. I'm starting to believe that those are the only two things that he heard at the meeting they had. Matthews once again asked Jana who determined that the time of death was 11 a.m. She told him it had been signed by Devin George, state registrar. Of course, Matthews says he never heard of him and then tries to blow it off like it's not even a legal document. He told Jana that a clerk somewhere in an office had signed off on the death certificate, and it hadn't been anyone in his office or anyone that had anything to do with the coroner. Jana informed Matthews that the certificate stated that Lewis Carter had been the certifier. Matthews let Jana know that Lewis Carter is the coroner and that a coroner cannot determine a time of death. Once again, this is not true. A coroner or a medical examiner can determine a time of death, usually within a range, using all of the factors that I discussed previously, such as body temp and rigor mortis. But speaking of Lewis Carter, he is no better than the rest of these yahoos. When Jana got the coroner's report, it was full of mistakes just like the autopsy report. Matthews told Jana that even though Tony was not the perfect husband and had his faults, that he is not a murderer. He stated, quote, "He absolutely is not. He did not murder your sister. The evidence that was at the scene is 100% consistent with the results of everything we have in hand." What evidence at the scene? The few photos that they took? Some with the family dog lying on the bed with Crystal's body? Or the spent shell casing that miraculously turned up a week later and was found by Tony, not law enforcement? Or the fact that the gun looked like it had been placed in Crystal's hand after she was shot. Her finger was still wrapped around the trigger like it hadn't even been shot yet. There's no way it would have stayed like that if she did this to herself. That gun would have dropped or flew out of her hand because of the recoil. So what evidence at the scene points to a suicide? In regards to the inconsistencies in the timeline, Matthew suggested that maybe Tony just got confused about where he was that day. Was he confused when he said he was in a karate class full of kids when he wasn't? It was the day his wife died. He should remember every detail of every minute of that day. Matthews then tries to pacify Jana by calling her sweetie and saying that he knew she was grieving and it was going to take a long time to get over what had happened and to come to terms with things. But he tells her to trust him when he says, "There is no foul play here." Well, in my opinion, he is the last person I would trust. Why is he so confident when they didn't even investigate? There was nothing at the scene that screamed suicide. No note, nothing. Jana ignored Matthew's cockiness and asshole comments and went on to ask him if any toxicology results had come back yet. He stuttered around and said, she had whatever medication that she was on. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Then he chuckles as he says that there was no date rape drug, no marijuana, nothing. He then says he doesn't have it in front of him or he would read it to her. This guy is never prepared. Jana then asked him if he would call her sometime that week when he did have it in front of him. He tells her that he and Chief Irby, who I wouldn't trust either, talked about it and went over it together and found nothing out of the ordinary. Not a thing. So does he think because he went over it with Chief Irby that Jana should just take their word for it and not look at it herself? And speaking of the toxicology report, when Jana finally did get it, it was missing the second page, which would have been where it showed what dosages of medications were in her system. She never has seen the second page. Matthews then told Jana that he was sorry he had to be so blunt with her, but he had strong feelings about this case, and that there was nothing to lead him to believe that there was any foul play. Nothing except for everything that Jana and Dane had brought to his attention, but that doesn't count, I guess. It's irrelevant. And apparently, Sheriff Matthews is confused on how an investigation is done and how a case is solved. It has nothing to do with feelings. It has to do with facts. Something, he says, is irrelevant. This was the end of the phone meeting between Jana and Sheriff Matthews. On March 7th, Crystal's oldest son, Corbin, had reached out to Tony to find out when he should expect to receive his mother's remains. It wasn't until March 22nd, a few days after Tony found out that the accusations against Jana and the GoFundMe money were dropped and that he wasn't going to get a dime, Tony finally decided to mail Crystal's remains. Had Corbin not reached out to Tony, it's quite possible that he would have never received his mother's ashes. Even after reaching out, it still took a whole month of Tony having the ashes before he mailed them. 2 days later, on March 24th, Corbin finally received his mother's ashes. And the way Tony did it is just plain vile. He had to be a total asshole because he was money hungry and pulled some bullshit. Corbin immediately sent a picture of the box he received to his Uncle Dane. Not only were they not properly packaged, they had arrived in an old brown box. What he found inside was even worse. The urn contained loose ashes and only about a fourth of the amount that there should have been. Also, it came without any documentation, even though the crematory said that there would have been at least 4 different forms of documentation in the original box of ashes. That way, if they were split up, the documents could follow all the sets. So at this point, Corbin don't even know for sure where Tony had gotten these ashes. It could have been a cat or a dog or another person. Hell, it could have been ashes out of a fire pit. There was nothing proving that these were actually Crystal's remains. The ashes were also mailed the same way as anything else you would mail. Tony did, however, spend $100 to have insurance put on the package, so if anything happened to it, Corbin could file an insurance claim. Crystal's life, in Tony's eyes, amounted to $100, though with his money-hungry ass, I'm surprised he even spent that. Tony obviously didn't let the Oak Grove post office know what he was mailing when he mailed the cremation and didn't follow the proper procedure. The Postal Inspection Services were contacted immediately, and an investigation was opened. On March 29th, 2023, Jana and Dane had a meeting with the District Attorney, Penny Ducier. Also in attendance was Victor Smith, the District Attorney's investigator. This turned into another shit show, just like the meeting with the sheriff. Jana and Dane tell Ducier that they are also there on behalf of their mother, who is not in good health and cannot bring herself to talk about Crystal's death yet. Ducier asks Jana and Dane what they wanted to start with, and Dane tells her that they had read the autopsy report. You know, the report with all of the mistakes in it, even the spelling of Crystal's name, and that they were really interested in seeing the toxicology report to see if all of Crystal's medications were in her system. Dane tells Ducier that it was their understanding that she had been waiting on the toxicology report to come back, to which she responds that she already has the report, but she forgot to print it out, so she doesn't have a copy in front of her. What is up with these people that forget to bring documents to a meeting where they will be discussing said documents? As she's looking on her computer for the toxicology report, she asked if they still wanted to see the police report. Dane told her absolutely. Jana then asked her if there was a way they could get a copy of the police report, and Ducier said no, that she would rather they just look at the one she provided, because really they weren't supposed to have the police report. Why not? If the case was such an open and shut case, then all of the reports should be public information that anyone could get by submitting a FOIA request, especially a family member. Dane noticed in the police report that it said the slug wasn't recovered, even though Sheriff Matthews said it was recovered. He asked Ducier about this contradiction, and she stated, "I think they recovered the slug from the bed. I don't know that they recovered the casing." Dane took this opportunity to tell her that the casing was found, a week later by Tony. She started to reply, then stopped. Dane once more asked if they could get a copy of the police report. Ducier told him no and then asked why they needed it. "I'm sorry, but why do they have to need it? Maybe they just want it, and if they do need it for something, why does she think they need to tell her the reason?" This is when Dane told her about the discrepancies between the timeline that Tony gave the police and the timeline located on Crystal's computer. He explained that they had cell phone records that put him at the scene at around the same time Crystal died, according to the death certificate. Dane told DA Ducier that the sheriff said that this is irrelevant to the investigation. He then asked her opinion on if she also thought these discrepancies were irrelevant. The ring cam system that supposedly didn't work that day at Tony and Crystal's home, even though it had attached to Wi-Fi, cell phone location records, the time of death is determined by a coroner on an official state death certificate, protective orders, and CPS reports. Duchier then interrupted Dane and asked if he knew how a time of death gets on an autopsy report. Mind you, he didn't say anything about an autopsy report, only an official state death certificate. Dane informed Duchier at this point that he knows a thing or two about what coroners do. He told her that his wife Julie is a nurse practitioner and that she talks to doctors every day and nurse practitioners every other day. He tells her that they have talked to a coroner. Duchier then jumps on the Sheriff Matthews train and tells them that they don't have an exact time of death. Dane then tells her that the time of death was listed as 11 a.m. and that they have cell phone records putting Tony there at precisely this time. Duchier then stated the obvious. So, you think your brother-in-law did it? Dane then explains to Duchier that Crystal had started tracking Tony's movements 1 week prior to her death on her work laptop. He told her that they have his movements for that whole day and his cell phone locations also. He pointed out that the timeline that Tony had given Chief Irby on February 9th was utter garbage, and even though the sheriff believed Tony's narrative, he and Jana had evidence that would be admissible in court. And this is when we find out that Duchier's name absolutely fits her. She asked, "What difference does that make?" She said there is no way to have an exact time of death for anyone. She states 3 things that they use to determine the time of death: the last known contact, the time when the body was discovered, and the body temperature. Okay, first of all, there are many other things that they use, as we discussed earlier. And she is absolutely right that they use the temperature of the body. But as we know in this case, there was no temperature taken. They only wrote down that Crystal was cold. And I understand that the time of death is never going to be exact to the minute or second, especially if there was no witness to the person dying. With this being said, it is possible to get an estimated time of death. It's possible to tell if Crystal died that morning or closer to the time she was discovered, had they done a proper investigation. But they didn't. They decided immediately that they were going to call it a suicide and nothing else mattered after that, so nothing else was done. They thought it was going to be a quiet, open and closed case. They didn't prepare for the suspicions that the family would have or the hard questions that they would ask, and now that it's gotten to that point, they can't go back and fix it, so they make excuses. Duchier told Dane that there is no way to give an exact time of death. He said, "Well, we have his cell phone location data from his activities the entire day." And Duchier replies with, "So, what does that prove?" To which Dane replies, "It proves he was at the scene." To which Duchier replied, "Okay, but you don't know when she died." Yes, they did. She died somewhere around 11 in the morning on February 9th. She just wanted to keep talking in circles, and the conversation was going nowhere. It's unbelievable that they are trying to convince anyone that the time of death cannot be determined when it happens every day. Do they think everyone is just ignorant, or are they that ignorant? If it's the latter, then it's really scary that these people are in charge of anything. This is how these people, who are sworn to protect, talk to grieving families. They won't admit to the fact that maybe, just maybe, the investigation could have been better, that maybe Tony should have at least been looked at like any other spouse would have been in this situation. I don't expect them to admit that their investigation was botched or that someone might have been a tad bit biased, which I believe that both of those are true. But at least admit that maybe you could have done more and offer to make it up to them and to Crystal by doing more now, instead of making excuses for your actions. Duchier then asked Dane if he wanted to see the photos, but at this point, Dane was pissed, and rightfully so. He got up and walked out of the room to compose himself, while Duchier asked Jana if she wanted to see the photos. Of course, she did, and of course, Duchier doesn't know how to work her computer to retrieve the photos, so she called someone to her office to help her. While they waited, Duchier asked Jana if she had seen the photos before. She told her no, that she hadn't, and she didn't want Dane to see them either. Right about that time, the DA's investigator, Victor Smith, came into the room with Dane following behind him. Dane apologized for walking out and letting his emotions get the best of him. Douchier, showing that she isn't really listening to what anyone has said so far, says to Jana, "So you said you've seen the pictures. I'm just wondering what pictures you've seen." Jana corrected Douchier and said once again that they hadn't seen the pictures. Dane then told Douchier that they hadn't seen any photos from the crime scene at all, but they did take several photos of Crystal's body that the funeral director, who has seen lots of bodies and lots of injuries, told them that they should take. He had said there were some things that were concerning, and that there were signs that a struggle occurred before Crystal died. Douchier then stated that there were no injuries listed at all. Dane cut her off and said that they had photographic evidence of abrasions and lacerations on the left forearm. Her fingernails were freshly manicured, yet one was broken, and there was dirt and debris underneath them. There were also multiple bruises on her legs and in her thighs. This is when Douchier interrupted and said, "Look, this is the picture," as she didn't show any picture. She then tried to make excuses for the marks on Crystal's legs, suggesting that they were there because of the way she had been laying in the bed when she died. Then she states that yes, Crystal had nice nails, but even a woman who just got her nails done can break one easily. Victor finally figures out to bring the crime scene photos up on Douchier's computer for her, and at this point, Dane gets up and leaves the room so that he doesn't have to view the photos. The first photo she pulled up was one of Crystal's hand on the gun. She looked for a second until she was able to locate the broken nail on Crystal's right ring finger. Then, as Douchier actually laughed, she said, "You know that can happen to anyone, right? I don't see that as a sign of a struggle." Douchier then tries to scroll to the next photo, but it won't let her. She turns to Victor and asks what she's doing wrong, and he says, "Nothing. It's at the end. The last of them." He then looks at Jana and tells her that there were very few crime scene photos taken. That's an understatement. In most crime scenes, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of photos taken. There's 3 types of photos that the crime scene investigators take: overview, mid-range, and close-ups. Overview shots are wide shots of the whole screen. Mid-range photos are the pieces of evidence and context, and then the close-up photos are very detailed shots with scales. There were less than 40 photos taken of the crime scene in this case, and crime scene photos in this case are laughable to say the least. Douchier then tells Jana and Dane that she had been told that the bullet was stovepiped. A stovepiped bullet is where the spent casing gets stuck in the injection port like a tiny stovepipe. This could happen due to faulty magazines, weak ammo or recoil, a dirty gun, or a weak ejector or extractor. It's important to remember that Tony supposedly found the shell casing a week after Crystal's death on her makeup table, 6 to 7 feet across the room from the bed in which she was found. So, if Tony did find it across the room like he said he did, then law enforcement is wrong when they say the gun was stovepiped, jammed, or it was a limp wrist situation, which are 3 different theories that they put into 3 different reports. Yet none of the theories matched the evidence at the scene. So back to the meeting with DA Douchier. Douchier then pulled out a photo of Crystal at the crime scene and asked Jana to look at the way she was lying. She stated that the marks on Crystal's body were actual lividity that lined up with the position she was found in, and that there was no bruising at all. Mind you, no one in Jana's family had seen these photos yet. The photos Dane had been referring to were the ones taken at the funeral home. Douchier then says that they're going to go through the autopsy photos, but once again, she couldn't seem to figure out how to access them on her computer and asked Victor to help her. Once they got their shit show in order, Douchier showed Jana a picture of the headboard of Crystal's bed. The headboard was wooden, and a bullet hole was visible about 2 or 3 inches from the bottom. Duchier stated that this was a very level shot, which Jana acknowledged since she was the one who did Crystal's makeup post-mortem and knew the shot was temple to temple. Dane re-entered the room and they moved on to the toxicology report. He and Jana sat in silence, going over the list of substances found in Crystal's system. They were looking for one medication in particular, Abilify. As they're going through the list, they are writing down the medications that were listed. After a couple of minutes of this, Duchier suddenly snatched the paper from them and said that she really wasn't supposed to let them write everything down, and then asked them what it was exactly that they were looking for. This lady needs to mind her own business. First, she wants to know why they want a copy of the police report. Then she wants to know what they're looking for in the toxicology report. It's called looking for answers, something the family wouldn't have to do themselves if law enforcement had done their job. Dane went on to explain that this medication was important because the narrative that Tony had been putting out to the community was that the doctor changed Crystal's dosage of Abilify or had taken her off of it completely, and that this was the reason for her heightened depression and ultimately the reason she took her life. Duchier, however, wasn't going to help them out or make anything easy. So she told him that they could make a request to the lab to get their own copy of the toxicology report and to have someone look at it that understood what it said. Dane then apologized to Duchier for getting emotional. He told her that he just couldn't understand why the sheriff didn't see any of the things that they had shown him as relevant. Of course, Duchier stood up for the sheriff and said that he did chase down a lot of the things that he and Jana had seen as suspicious. But at the end of the day, he still believed it was a suicide. Really? He chased them down? He couldn't even remember what they were until Jana reminded him, unless she's talking about the storage unit and the rental car vacation to Hawaii. Duchier then stated that when she had first talked to him and Jana, she thought maybe they had been on to something. But after reading the police report and looking at the autopsy report, she had no doubt in her mind that it was self-inflicted. I'm sorry, but what in the autopsy report would give her that conclusion? Such an important document having that many mistakes in it should have been a huge red flag to anyone. Dane then gave Duchier an overview of what had been going on between Tony and Crystal. The drop in enrollment at the karate school because of Tony's behavior towards little girls, and how Crystal had been suspicious and started tracking his movements just a week before her death. Dane explained that they believed that Crystal was preparing to leave Tony, or have him locked up, or both. Dane then explains to Duchier that they can't get a straight answer from the sheriff regarding anything, even something as straightforward as whether Tony still worked for the sheriff's department or not. Duchier piped in to say that no, Tony didn't work for the sheriff anymore. When Dane said that Tony was still on the sheriff's website, Duchier backtracked and said, well, he could be an auxiliary deputy. I don't know. Which proved Dane's point that they couldn't get a straight answer from any of these people. Duchier then changed the subject and said basically that the crime scene told the story and that Tony would have to be brilliant to stage the scene and mimic the path of the bullet. Dane told her that wasn't true and that Tony would have to be just a little bigger than Crystal, which he was. He also said that he believed that there was a struggle over the gun, as the injuries on Crystal's body indicated such. Duchier, with her high and mighty attitude, said she saw no evidence of that, and Dane said that was fine, and that it would be up to a jury to decide. Duchier then said, if you sue him, that's fine. Then she even said, I think you should do that. Well, for what? If she doesn't believe that Tony did anything wrong and this was actually self-inflicted, then what would they be suing Tony for? Duchier then told Dane and Jana that if they felt that way, then they needed to go talk to a private attorney. Dane informed her that he already had been, and that his wife's family was full of attorneys. At that point, Duchier seemed to be done and asked if there was anything else that she could answer for them. Had she actually answered anything up to this point? I don't think that she has. Dane said that they had evidence to discredit the police report, but since she had already stated that she found the police report credible, He didn't think that they were going to get anywhere, so they were done. Duchier reiterated that yes, she did find the police report credible, to which Dane said that they would have it eviscerated in court, and that he was just letting her know that as a courtesy. At this point, her douchiness started to come back out, and she said, "It won't have anything to do with me." Yes, ma'am, it will have everything to do with you. If it's proven that Tony did in fact kill Crystal, and you, along with the sheriff and everyone else, turned a blind eye, which is what you are all doing when you do your talking in circles bullshit, and can't even answer a direct question. Dane made sure to tell Duchier that he wasn't attacking her ethics, and he knew that she had to stand by law enforcement. She even had to correct this by saying she doesn't stand by law enforcement, but she stands by the law. She just loves to nitpick everything that is said. She then said that she didn't think they were going to be able to get anywhere, and she wished him the best of luck, but Jana wasn't done yet. She told Duchier that she knew changing the manner of death from a suicide to a homicide was going to be hard to prove, and that her only concern was if it was in fact a suicide, then where Tony was when it happened. Was he on the phone with her? Or did he stop by the house on his way back from Bastrop that morning? Could he have called for help? Duchier's only response to this was, her death was immediate, you know. Really? Was that comment even necessary? So is she saying that if Tony was on the phone with Crystal and heard the gun go off, it's okay if he just says, "Oh well, fuck it. She probably died instantly, so I'm not going to bother calling for help." Jana ignored Duchier's rude-ass comment and continued theorizing that maybe he was on the phone with Crystal when it happened, and if he was, did he hear a gunshot? She explained that these are all valid points because Tony had admittedly talked to Crystal on the phone around 10 a.m. that morning. And according to what Tony said himself, the conversation was kind of strange. And he also drove from Bastrop, having had to pass the house around the time that the death certificate stated that Crystal died, and drove straight to the sheriff's office, according to the Google location timeline. Jana told Duchier that this was all in the documents that she had given the sheriff during their meeting. You know, the irrelevant documents. Duchier actually had the nerve to say that if Tony had been on the phone with Crystal, that it wasn't a crime. No shit, Sherlock. But if he had been on the phone with her and heard the gun go off, then why did he say he had been trying to get a hold of her all day? Why didn't he hang up and call 911 if he heard a shot? And why would he just go about his day and then hours later send someone else to the house to check on her if he had heard a shot 6 hours before on the phone? How did he know to send them straight to their bedroom? Jana, being the badass sister that she was, agreed that it wasn't a crime, but it was a civil case, and then asked Duchier if she could please spell Crystal's name right. Duchier, who seemed to get dumber by the minute, responded with, "Yeah, how do you spell her name? You gotta change the what? It doesn't have the H in it?" And now would be a good time to tell you all that Duchier's name is actually Ducier. But see what happens when you add an H to someone's name that doesn't belong? It turns you into a douche. Jana then tells Ducier that they actually can narrow down the time of death by getting Crystal's phone records. She said that Crystal was always on her phone, so if they checked the time of her last phone activity, that would give them a good idea of when she died. Jana said she had asked the sheriff to get them, and in fact, he wouldn't even have to subpoena them. Tony could print them out. But he never did because the sheriff never asked for them. Why wouldn't they do this just to give the family some peace and closure? Also, why wouldn't they have checked Tony's phone to make sure that what he told them added up? That would have been done in any other case when someone is dead and the spouse was the last known person to see them. But Tony was never considered a suspect for a minute. They considered it a suicide without any investigation at all. Ducier, instead of saying yes, that phone records and pings should have been looked at, and that she would get on it and make sure that it gets done. All she said was that she didn't think that they would ever be satisfied by anything they were told, and that they should take the civil route. Both Dane and Jana agreed that they absolutely would go the civil route. Dane went on to tell Ducier that the sheriff had done nothing but lie to them time and again. He had told them Tony had been at Forest High School working all day. But then, when they had shown the proof that Crystal's computer showed that he had been in Bastrop that morning, the sheriff would backtrack and say that he knew he was in Bastrop. He would say whatever he could to pacify the situation at the time. Dane let Ducier know that his job as an engineering consultant involved fact finding and data corruption, and that Jana was working on getting her doctorate. He said that Sheriff Matthews talked to them like they were backwoods hicks that didn't have a half a brain between them. But Dane wanted to make it very clear that they were not stupid. Ducier then says that she doesn't think that they are stupid, but that she does think two things. The first being that they wanted to look at the case as if it's an engineering problem, and it's not. She tells them that crimes are not like that. They're more complex and in a different way than an engineering problem would be. Dane never said to look at his sister's death like an engineering problem. He was just stating that he is in the profession of fact finding, and he wanted to let them know that they are not stupid people and they are educated. When did he ever compare Crystal's death to an engineering problem? The second thing she thinks is that there had been a breakdown between them and the sheriff, so therefore they weren't going to believe anything he said anymore. She then says that her job was to look at things objectively, and that was what she had done. She said when looking at the autopsy, it is very clear that it was self-inflicted. But once again, the autopsy is full of mistakes, so I'm not seeing where it's very clear on anything. She tells Dane that she might not have seen as many dead bodies as his sister or his wife or whoever. He had clearly said his wife, so she obviously wasn't listening. But that she has talked to a lot of police officers and that Dr. Peretti had done the autopsies for probably 50% of all the homicides in the state of Louisiana and in Arkansas, and that she trusts what he said when he said that Crystal's case was a suicide. Dane, however, had some information about Dr. Peretti. He asked Ducier if she was aware that Dr. Peretti was operating under multiple sanctions from the Arkansas Medical Board. So let's talk about Dr. Frank Peretti. Peretti is well known to some as he is the one who did the autopsies on the West Memphis Three. However, he has been met with criticism of his work. He is said to have lied about his credentials and only having a master's degree instead of a PhD in pathology. He has also been accused of making inaccurate determinations during an autopsy because he made the determinations without having all of the necessary documents at hand, such as medical records. We know that he had most of the information on Crystal's autopsy report wrong, including her prior medical conditions all the way down to her hair and eye color. If he can't get small details correct, then how can he be trusted with the bigger details? Ducier, of course, makes the excuse that all pathologists are under investigation at one time or another because of the job they have. But Dane stopped her right there and informed her that Dr. Peretti was under sanction for not one, but numerous ethical violations. Dane then told Ducier that they could move on from the topic of Peretti, as that was not her problem. With the meeting coming to a close, Jana has one more topic she wants to discuss with Ducier, just to get her opinion on the matter. She asked why Sheriff Matthews would get so angry over obtaining a death certificate. Ducier then gives some bullshit answer that doesn't even make sense at all. She says that death certificates go to the next of kin, which would have been Tony, not Jana. She said if Jana wanted one, that she could have probably obtained one from the state of Louisiana, but that the sheriff couldn't give her one. What in the flying fuckery is this lady talking about? Has she not been listening to anything Jana and Dane have said in this meeting? Jana didn't ask the sheriff for a copy of the death certificate. She did, in fact, order it from the state. And yes, anyone can order a death certificate from the state. Jana explained to Doucier that she did order her own copy through Vital Records because Tony had kept the 5 copies that he had gotten. She told her how Sheriff Matthews talked to her and basically called her a liar and asked who had signed off on the certificate. And even though she had stayed calm the entire time, Sheriff Matthews got irate and said he didn't understand what she and her family were trying to do, and basically accused her of forging the certificate. Doucier then tries to pacify the situation and said that she didn't know anything about that, but that she wanted them to find peace. She said that even though Tony sounds like a jackass, she doesn't believe that he murdered Crystal. But then she says something strange. She says, quote, "I think, not based on this, common sense will tell you that your brother-in-law knew that this was probably waiting on him because that's why he had Chuck Harris go." What? So she is saying that Tony knew Crystal was going to or had taken her life, and instead of running home to check on her and maybe try to stop her, he thinks it's more important to go to the bakery barn and then drive around Oak Grove aimlessly all afternoon? And then send someone who is basically a stranger to walk in and find her? She's right in the sense that Tony knew what was at home waiting on him, and he knew exactly what he was sending Chuck Harris to walk into, because Tony is the one who pulled the trigger, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others. Dane didn't pass up the opportunity to bring up the fact that Tony had also signed his daughter out of school that day, instead of letting her ride the bus like she always did, most likely because he didn't want her to go home and find Crystal. This is where the meeting ends, and Dane and Jana realize that after talking to the sheriff and the DA, they are getting nothing but the runaround, and all the information that they had been given by either Tony, the sheriff, or the DA, all varied in content and or context. Jana and Dane were far from done. They would continue to reach out to people in authority, hoping that someone would listen to what they had to say and take them seriously. But that will have to wait until next week. For photos from this episode, check out the victim's voice on social media. And if you would like to request a case, you can message me or go to our new website at the-victims-voice.org. Come back and join us next week for the part 4 in Crystal's case. For photos from this episode, check out the victim's voice on social media. And if you would like to request a case be covered, you can message me or go to our new website at the-victims-voice.org. Come back and join us next week for part 4 in Crystal's case. Until then, stay safe and peace out.